Hey, good morning, good afternoon, depending on where you're connecting from. My name is Andrea Rossi, and I'll be delivering you this 30 minutes or so webinar called Unlock Your ForgeRock with iWelcome Consent Management. Before getting started, I would like first to apologize for my low-key, undesired, unplanned voice tone, but that's an easy one. The other thing is I would like to check whether you can hear me properly. So if you can just write anything like a yes, fine, on the chat box you can find on your GoToWebinar panel. So let me see if something pops up here. Yes, fine. Thank you for providing such a feedback. All right, so let's get it started. So as I said, today we talk about iWelcome and ForgeRock together. So let's get it started. And basically today we are addressing three questions, hopefully with some answers for you. The first one is what do we do and what is ForgeRock doing in this consumer IAM space? The second question is about why should we coexist? And the third question is hopefully how can we, iWelcome and ForgeRock, coexist? Let's start with the first question and briefly what we do. Some of you might already know us, but it's good to set the baseline of knowledge. So in order to explain who we are and also who ForgeRock is, I like to pull out this Kupinger Compass, the latest one about the consumer IAM platforms. So iWelcome, as well as ForgeRock, is among the product leaders in this space. So the first question could be, how can two competitors provide an hybrid approach and coexist? So first of all, let's explain a bit what we mean by that C that stands before the word identity and access management. Because I always find out that there is a bit of a, not a confusion, but the perception that when we use that C, it's just for the consumers. Actually, if you take a look at the three main personas that we see in every identity and access management implementation, you have the traditional workforce identity management, and that's where you have sort of thousands of users, well-defined, and these projects are security driven. Then you start going into the business partners. They could be agents, dealers, resellers. Then their number goes up, and these projects are a combination of security driven and business driven, because you need all of your channel to be happily using your application and engaging with the final goal of any equation, which is getting to the consumers or customers. Even with that, within that definition, you can have a consumer like a prospect or an existing customer. They both start with a C. They typically are in the millions, and we're talking typically about millions of users, at least for the average to large company. It's important to declare right now that for us, iWelcome, at least, C stands for consumers, customers, as well as what we can stretch to define business customers, the business partner that are our intermediate layers from the employees to the consumers. And that is really our sweet spot, and we call it B2B2C. So let's talk briefly about the problem. I think it's well known for the experts, but in a nutshell, today in a bunch of consumers applications and also business application, you have different identity silos built on top of different apps or different portals. And each of these app or portal, it's basically producing its own log, which might not be used for security purpose, but it has a lot of value from a behavioral standpoint. So if we look at this equation, which is not the equation, sorry, picture, which is very often found out in many clients, regardless of the vertical they belong to, this is basically the impact of that. A fragmented online experience with essentially the same user with a bunch of passwords, or maybe even the same one, but with no single sign-on from one silos to the other. So it's very fragmented and a lot of hurdles. But I think it's becoming more and more important, the lack of a source of truth for consumer identities and also their access behaviors. What are these guys doing among all the different touch points the company provides? And last but not least, in Europe, but as well as US, the lack of we call it consent master record, a place where you can really record all the consents and permissions that these consumers have declared to opt in, for example. In Europe, with GDPR, this is of utmost importance. In US, it's coming up, starting from California, but basically privacy-driven business or personal information control business, it's becoming increasingly important throughout the world. And this problem applies to B2B users as well. Partner dealers, I mean, think of them like working for a given company today, then a broker could move to a different insurance company or an agent or a field engineer. If they don't like working with the main company because their consumer experience and their B2B experience sucks, believe me, they will move to someone else, even just for that. So in a nutshell, what do we do? So if you look at this one picture on the right end, on the top end of the screen, you can see that first and foremost, that single source of truth that we provide enables the companies and our clients to provide a frictionless experience among the different applications, because instead of relying into completely separated identity silos, they can rely to a single one. And on top of that, all these users that magically are also part of families, don't forget about that, they can manage their consent and rights. This picture is a bit misleading. I mean, the consent management is not a separate option. It's typically embedded in each app and portal. So it's more an ability that we provide and extend any application that our clients might be integrating with our APIs. On the back end, if you look at the blue side of the screen, you have a bunch of back-end applications. CRM is one of those, or these, and this application can be relieved from what we call identity and consent management complexity. And a very simple example is, if a consumer is withdrawing its consent for a specific processing purpose on the email, then this information has to be propagated from the place where we collect it, the iWelcome CM platform, to the surrounding application sets, like the CRM. And last but not least, this single source of truth enables a bunch of data that can be sliced and diced for different personas, namely Chief Digital Officer, the CIO, IT operations, and of course the DPOs, data privacy officers, or Chief Security Information Officers in less privacy advanced type of countries. I'm not going to spend too much time on this chart, but this chart highlights the two, at the sort of a one level down, what iWelcome does. The green side of the pie, it's essentially what we deliver to the consumer or the end user. So from social registration to password service to single sign-on and federation to multi-factor authentication, which is important specifically in B2B scenarios. And last but not least, a bunch of stuff around content management, which I think it's a bit improperly sliced with the same size of the other slices of the pie, but consent management, and you're going to see that, it's the cornerstone of what we do combined with our identity and access management capabilities. On the blue side of the screen, you can see whatever the enterprise is using in order to connect the consumer to the backend application. So from provisioning to B2B delegated administration to all the consumer analytics information you can get. It's important to highlight that among our three key features, we deliver all this stuff on a private tenant model, which gives some level of appreciation to some medium to large clients that don't exactly like, especially in Europe, the shared tenant model where you don't really know where your data is residing. Okay, it might be you, but for some cases, that's from a legal standpoint, compliance, but also perceptional standpoint, not enough. So we can really deliver, West Coast, East Coast in the US, as well as very regional, country-specific in Europe, like Italy, France, and not just Germany and the Netherlands or Ireland, which is the typical deployment model for many cloud vendors. Now, let me drill it down a bit into the consent management capability. because on one side we have the traditional identity and access management. On the other side, and sometimes we forget to highlight it enough, I believe, we have a complete set of features about consent management. And more in the market, there are players coming up just for this capability. We provide this combined to the access management, identity and access management features, because end of the day, it's the same user who has to opt in and opt out for the different processing purpose for its attributes. We'll get visual into that. The only thing I wanted to highlight here is we've built our consent management features on top of what we call the iWelcome metadata model. So for each attribute of the identity record, you can extend without limits a set of metadata which are enriching that information. Of course, we have provided a set of predefined configuration for GDPR or GDPR likes. So metadata regarding the specific, for example, date of consent, which has been given on that specific attribute, that might be the date of birth, or when it has been consented, if there is a timeout for that consent, and so forth. But there is no really limit to use this model for additional metadata information on top of the GDPR or GDPR-like requirements. So that's very important because this capability that we call consent management are a key ingredient of this coexistence equation that we're describing today with ForgeRock. So let's move quickly about ForgeRock. So who is ForgeRock? ForgeRock is one of the leaders in this space. And if you drill one level down, you know their history. They're coming from open source component. They have now forked disconnected, so to say, from the open source approach. But in a nutshell, they have a number of components: an identity management provisioning component, an access management component, a directory, plus some other stuff. A lot of clients are using ForgeRock, but it's essentially, up until now at least, just for on-premise deployments. So there is a lot of B2C deployments on-premise. So this has been used by many clients who were a bit uncertain of moving their consumer data to the cloud. And they have decided to play the safe bet, at least a few years ago. Everything installed in-house, a tool with a lot of configuration and a lot of glue around it. All this stuff, it's sort of very good for the access management components. To be honest with you, we also use OpenIM into our engine as a hidden component. But the key issue here is there is no capability whatsoever provided here for consent lifecycle management. So really the idea is to combine these two words and try to offer an hybrid option. So now let's have a look at why iWelcome and ForgeRock should coexist. I think we have already hinted into what that could be already from the title, but I want to be a bit more specific and a bit more visual. So in order to do so, we'll go through a fictional user journey in the days of GDPR, taken from our reference implementation. It's basically from our demo. See our demo as a reference implementation of our capabilities. Keep in mind that we're often embedded into someone else's application. So this is not our product phase, it's just a reference implementation to highlight what we do. So this is my account on our demo system. When you get in, beside all the stuff that you might have if you are a real customer, you basically have 4 sections of information. One, it's the profile component. This profile component, it's where you really manage your identity attributes, and identity attributes like email and telephone, which can also turn out to be authentication second factors. The second component, it's what we call the privacy component. Here, you can do things like providing document consent on privacy policies or terms of services, versioning it, and auditing them. The second part is consent on the identity attributes. Here, the example is on top of email address, name, birth date, and gender. And then the example here shows just one processing purpose for each attribute, but there is no limit to that. So for example, the email could have 2 or 3 processing purposes. And the consumer has the sole service ability to opt in and opt out on that specific processing purpose for that specific attributes. So this is what we call managing the privacy settings, but you've also looked to life of the consumer in the days of GDPR. If you look at the bottom of the second screen of the last screenshot on the right, you can see obtain a copy of your profile information. Simply stated like that, what we can do as a welcome from there is you click it and you get all the information we collect about you in our platform. Plus, we notify with the surrounding applications that you want to get a copy of all the other information. That's easier said than done, of course. There's a bunch of integration if you really want to provide all the information, but we can be the sole service starting point for that process. Now, if you look at the timeline, this is becoming increasingly important because GDPR requires transparency, but also from a user standpoint, the user experience of knowing what you've been doing over the last week, month, or maybe years, it's important. So here we show the example of when we provide consent, when we withdraw consent, but at the same time, the timeline includes failed password, change password, every type of event that we store into our system. Now, how can ForgeRock and iWelcome coexist in the days of GDPR? And that's a key chart. So the first part is we leave ForgeRock as what we call the identity repository. ForgeRock on-prem stores the master identities, so the actual attributes. That could be the list of clients for a large bank. And so we leave that installation and all the management of the user experience, authentication, authorization. What we do as iWelcome on the back, it's to extend this installation or this deployment with what we call the consent ledger, adding consent management capabilities to ForgeRock, which doesn't have any, but storing it on the cloud, yes, but in an anonymous manner. So in other words, we don't store the actual birth date, name, surname, but just the pointer to the master record sitting on premise in ForgeRock. Now, I want to pause for a second because that's the essence of the coexistence equation. Let me repeat it again. ForgeRock installed on premise stores the actual information and manages the user experience, or at least the authentication part of it, to the end user. We are hidden on the back end in this specific scenario, storing consent information in an anonymous manner. Now let's have a look on how this can be done. And in order to do so, I would like to take again that simple menu of 4 line items for parts, excuse me, 4 components, and say who does what in this fictional consumer website. Well, for sure, ForgeRock manages all the information that are identity connected, name, surname, birth date, whatever you're required to store, plus email, telephone number, and any other identity attribute. iWelcome in the backend manage, ideally through the APIs, all the attributes that you want to expose to consent management. It's not just the identity attributes. Keep in mind, it can also be the document consent, like the terms of service or the privacy policy. Security, here we mean a lot the change password type of activities. This is managed by ForgeRock, but then we come again into the timeline. So all the events that are managed through, in order to see what happened when, this is a combination actually of iWelcome for the consent management visibility, which is very important according to any regulations, plus any other information which is more access related coming from ForgeRock. How is the logical integration performed? So just going one level down, you have ForgeRock, the identity record, and that can be whatever, okay? Just fictionally, name, surname, location, mobile, email, password. And on the back end, it's us. iWelcome, the consent ledger. What we store here, it's pointers to the different attributes. So let me move the animation forward. If we take the example here, we have information that points to the email where initially a consent has been given on 8th of February and then removed on the 10th of February, because that business reason for giving permission to use your email, the consumer changes mind. And at the same time, you can have a ledger where the location has been approved as an attribute for geo-based advertising, and the story goes on. So this is really a ledger. On the other side, it's the classical, typical identity record. It's important to say that why are we storing the pointer? Well, we can, of course, store the actual information, but for many clients we have seen, still today, the idea of moving consumer-based information, it varies by industry, but in some industry, the concern about moving consumer-based or customer-based information to the cloud, it's still a bit of a hurdle. So that's why, of course, we can store the actual information, the actual attribute, but we can also store these pointers, which provide total separation of visibility in terms of what we have in our database. In essence, we have a bunch of consent lines, but no visibility on the identity which is connected to this consent sequence. The webinar for now, and as you can imagine, it's a webinar, so it's not a university lecture. It's sort of done. I would like to give you a few takeaways and open up to Q&A. So first of all, the first key takeaways from today's webinar, it's very simple. I probably told you already 27 times. We can add consent management to existing ForgeRock deployments with a cloud-based consent ledger. And let me add one thing, which is always better not to put in writing. It's with a very low cost monthly recurring fee based on user. So there is also an economical component to the equation of adding these features in a cloud delivery model. The second statement is a bit bolder, and we will never approach a client saying, you're running ForgeRock, you have to migrate to something cloud. But we can do that. So don't take this adding consent management as a defensive option, but rather as a phase one of a journey that you as a client can then decide to move forward, moving a bunch of the functionalities and capabilities managed by ForgeRock completely to iWelcome. Keep in mind, we compete in the same market, so of course we do offer what ForgeRock offers in a cloud version. And last but not least, I want to reemphasize that we are, I call it the extended C partner. So it's not just consumer, not just customer, but really the whole equation of B2B2C. That, for example, combines in the insurance market, agents, brokers with customers and prospects, all combined in with scenarios where consent management is a strong need. In Europe, everywhere is a strong need. Elsewhere, it's becoming to be a very strong need. If you look at the US, I know that we have some US attendees here. It's starting to spread everywhere. And I think I saw a report from Gartner, a very simple assumption. Throughout the world today, consent management is relevant for, I think, less than 20% of the companies worldwide. It's going to become more than 60%. That's a Gartner assumption in 2-3 years from now. And that's not because we have GDPR or some equivalent level of privacy obsession. It's because it's simply requested by any consumer and customer to be in control of its personal information. The webinar is over, and I now open up to questions. So there is one first question about Okay, good. I start from this one. Is ForgeRock not cloud ready? Good question. ForgeRock has just announced a cloud version a few days ago with version 6.5. So of course, cloud is a must. You have to go there. There is no way out. But you know, the product has been historically on-prem, and the cloud offering or hosted cloud, it's very young in the market. So of course, you evaluate both options, and but what I can tell you for sure is the consent management. Even if ForgeRock it's into the UMA standards, believe me, when you take a look at the real capabilities, it's really not there. I mean, it took us a few years to develop a consent management model which really fits the desire and requirements of GDPR. So these were the two questions. Let me see if some more are coming up. Oh, I think it's fine. I mean, we got two questions, but I'll keep the mic open for another minute or so in case you are simply shy and you don't dare to ask further questions. So unless you're registering with a very strange email, and I've seen some, you will get this presentation, at least if your email is recognizable. And my email, and by the way, also my telephone number is in this presentation because I took a screenshot from my demo environment with my attributes. But you are happy and welcome to join me or call me or email me if you have further questions. If they get very technical, I will involve other folks in the company. And for example, when it comes to UMA, User Managed Access, we are a proud member of the Kantara initiative, so we can give a further set of details on the way we contribute to that standardization body. All right, there is another question here that says, does iWelcome support with designing consent question, or is there a partner ecosystem? Well, the way you structure the consent management, it's not a tooling thing. As I like to say, a tool is a tool, a fool is a fool, and a fool with a tool is still a fool. So in other words, we provide the tooling of that, but what you are subjecting to consent management, what is not needed, it's strongly linked to consultancy work that a bunch of our partners are doing in order to boil it down to the few attributes and document that we must expose to self-service consent management. Okay, there is no need to provide self-service consent management on everything. Okay, GDPR doesn't require for that. So you always need the partners to design any platform, a cloud consumer identity platform, as well as the old legacy stuff. I mean, the problem is and was and still is quite complex. So what standard are used for consent management? As I said, we are part of the Kantara initiative. So we sort of belong or we standardize on some components of user managed access. And I think we don't have time today to get into the details, but I'm more than happy to take the question offline because there are a number of this. So yeah, there is another question on how does it work with other IAM tools? Any references? You know, guys, to be honest, this approach can be extended to any other access management tool. That could be IBM on-prem, CA, or even Gigia and Genrain, because these guys are lacking consent management there. We decided to make these webinars specifically on ForgeRock because there is a lot of need to ForgeRock clients to extend the capabilities, but not keeping building glue and custom development on top of the current installation. So take it as the most hot and urgent need out there in the market to move to provide a bridge from on-prem to cloud. How quick can you implement? Oh, that's the $1 million question. Again, when it comes to clearly defined attributes on the consent management, it's really a matter of days. But the heaviest part is really to define what you as a company want to expose as consent management attributes for the user to opt in and opt out. And that typically varies not just within the company, but it might differ depending on the application which is incorporating our consent management controls. So unfortunately, the answer it is always it varies. All right, I think that there's another company. We are an insurer. Do you have any experience in this industry? Well, the insurance market is our largest vertical. And from what I can see, I joined the company 8 months ago. It's the vertical that deserves more attention for these matters because there is a combination of need for changing as well as a bunch of history and legacy application. So the need for someone in between to connect the new with the old, the privacy with the lack of privacy of old application, it's more needed than ever. Geez, question keep coming in. No, that wasn't a question. It was a statement from a colleague that says we're nearly to, not the top of the hour, but it's 4:32. I'm a big fan of short webinars, but this is the start of a journey. So if you are interested to know more, get in touch with us and we'll engage in a one-to-one, more detailed type of manner. All right, so I think it's all for now. If you are connecting from Europe, I wish you a great evening, dinner, whatever you are in Europe. I mean, for all the guys in the Nordics, get ready for dinner. It's about time. For the few guys that I can see connecting from the US, especially from the West Coast, thanks so much for waiting. Not too late in the morning. And in the coming month, we'll be more Asian friendly. Nobody Australia could join this webinar, but that was designed for Europe and US, but will be more Asia Pacific friendly in the coming month. Thank you for now, and I am really looking forward to seeing you in the next episode of our iWelcome webinar series. Thank you very much. Ciao.